So I'm here today to hopefully give you an understanding of various integrative therapies, adjunctive therapies that can be used for our clients who have states of activation based on early trauma that we'd like to access. I'm also wanting to give you all tools to use in observing your patients so you know when you can talk to them in narrative form, cognitively, and when you need to slow down and work on a sensory, experiential level because this part of the brain is offline. This is your neocortex. And if you look at your little handout, you see some of the functions. Very first page, page 1, they're rather crudely numbered, of your neocortex. So this little part here is your thinking brain, language, communication, reasoning, planning, voluntary movement, sensory association, symbolic thinking, narrative function. Isn't that a lot of what we do as therapists? That's the part of the brain we're accessing. As therapists, we're especially accessing the prefrontal cortex. And if you want a better picture of that, you can turn to your next page. And it's this part right around the forehead. So this is the part we're working with a lot as therapists. The prefrontal cortex refers to an area of the neocortex which manages working memory, judgment, planning, sequencing of activity, and abstract reasoning. So now let's open up your hand puppet. And this is your limbic brain. And it's actually sequenced in the head like that. Our prefrontal cortex comes around and our limbic brain is underneath. Why is the limbic system important? And the limbic system is important because many times we're trying to access the thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex. We're saying, tell me what that means to you. Or can you think back to another time where that happened? Or is there a different way you could consider approaching that? We're talking to the prefrontal cortex. The limbic brain is in the background. It's having its moment. The limbic brain is the emotional brain. It houses the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and the limbic cortex. So there's some thinking that the somatic experiencing people are doing, which they're saying there's a 7 times lag between what the limbic system is going through and what gets to the prefrontal cortex. So my limbic system may be saying, it's hot, I'm tired, I don't want to learn this stuff, what relevance does it have? And the prefrontal cortex is saying, how do I use this? Or what do I need to do in the rest of my day? There are different conversations happening. So let's look at specifically what the limbic system does. It's the core of our emotional life and has a lot to do with the formation of memories. The hypothalamus, I think, is important for us just in terms of the central nervous system functions. The hypothalamus, so here's our amygdala, here's our brainstem. Both the amygdala, both the limbic system and the brainstem are going to be affecting the central nervous system. So when we talk about a patient who's in fight or flight, they come in your office and, you know, that damn manager, he's on my case again, I did it all right, he's just out to get me, I'm trying to get fired, he wants to fire me. You're up into fight, flight. So that's part of these systems, limbic and brainstem firing. So if we talk only to this part of the brain, we're not going to get through. One of the things we're going to need to do is find ways to access the emotional brain. And I know this is a broad brush view of these 3 parts of the brain, and we could spend a lot of time on them. But the understanding that people who are working with integrative therapies, the kinds I'm going to show you today, EMDR, and somatic experiencing is that they're trying to access parts of the brain that we're not accessing easily with talk therapy or with language. EMDR works with something called bilateral stimulation. So you either have a headset with tones that go right, left, or you hold tappers which stimulate one hand and then the other. You're trying to stimulate neural networks that Kim was talking about in the right side of the brain. If you remember, that's where they think trauma is stored, and create a window where you can bring in an observing self. The idea with the EMDR is to see these images come up. If the session were to run all the way through, eventually the patient or client begins to form a narrative with new information based on images that have not previously been in conscious memory. They come up during the bilateral stimulation. And then our job as clinicians is to bring an observing self, an observing ego, to this information. Somatic experiencing is trying to do very much what the EMDR is doing, but it's doing it through all sensory channels rather than working with a technology that stimulates imagery. They work with the imagery that's known in a felt sense in the body. So they're trying to reach experiential states. I think the important thing, though, is to be able to differentiate between when somebody, for me, is really lost in an emotional state, and I'm not going to be able to access them without first addressing the somatic process.